Check, check, mic check. Check, check, mic check. Welcome to Podcast Envy. I'm your podcast boss, Andrea Klender. Happy Halloween. And to celebrate my favorite time of the year, I have got a podcast tarot card reading to share with you. Okay, if you're not into tarot, don't tune out. This is going to be really interesting, I promise. No matter when you are listening, if it's not Halloween time anymore, just know that the energy around this time of year is always one of my favorites. I love haunted houses and spooky decorations and hot apple cider. Also, being a former theater kid, I love costumes, stage makeup, playing a role, pretending to be someone or something you are not. It's an opportunity to do things outside of the norm for you, to behave in a different way. Heck, maybe even to use a different voice when you speak. Perhaps that's the true origin of my other podcast, the one that began it all, The Creative Imposter, where we talk about the balance between feeling like a fraud and that old saying that I dislike, by the way, fake it till you make it, the intersection between authenticity and taking a risk on a new way of identifying yourself, on who you are, what you do, and how the two intertwine and intermingle. Last week on The Creative Imposter, I had Charlotte Alea on as my guest. Charlotte is a mentor for women to help them discover their self-worth and has recently written a book called To Be Worthy, which is coming out on Amazon this November. I'll link it in the show notes for this episode at thecreativeimposter.com/podenvy052. And originally, I met Charlotte and became fascinated with her work through her online tarot card readings and forecasts. While tarot is not the primary focus of her business any longer, she did turn me on to it, and I've been practicing, learning, dabbling, getting to know a couple of different decks for the past 2 years. You may be thinking, what does tarot have to do with Halloween? And more importantly, what does it have to do with podcasting? Hang tight, I'll get there. But first, I want to shout out a listener of Podcast Envy, Dion. Dion has recently launched Off the Beaten Podcast, an intimate exploration of Chicago and its people. Congratulations, Dion, and thanks for the awesome 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Here's what Dion had to say. This podcast is a must listen for anyone planning on entering the medium. I first became acquainted with Andrea when I was a guest on one of her other podcasts, Power Your Story, which she does with her high school students as part of the CPS After School Matters program. I already had a thought in my head that I wanted to start a podcast, and working with Andrea and her students only got me more excited about the idea. Following that, I began listening to this pod, and I will say it's super helpful in brainstorming ideas or thinking about various approaches, as well as helped me get past my paralysis by analysis of actually starting my pod. Andrea is very knowledgeable. Of course, that's a little aside by me. Andrea is very knowledgeable. Additionally, she has an awesome voice and is someone that you just really enjoy listening to. DM from Off the Beaten Podcast. Well, Dion actually gave us 3 solid episodes of Power Your Story with my high school students on gun violence due to his expertise with the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence. So thank you for that, Dion. Thank you for the awesome, detailed review. I love it so much. And I know, if you're a devout listener of Podcast Envy, you probably know that I don't put a ton of stock in ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts to, quote, get you to the top of the charts, unquote. But it does create listener validation, and it feels awesome to know that the things that I'm saying and offering and creating are actually helping someone else. So I do truly appreciate the love. I also want to take a moment to shout out a new community member, Becky Kilimnik. Becky, I'm so sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Becky Kilimnik, co-host of Homespun Haints. I met Becky just a couple of weeks ago at She Podcasts Live and got introduced to her show just in time for Halloween. I love how these things work out. On Homespun Haints, they bring on guests to share their real-life ghost and haunting stories. I love even more how she and her co-host, Diana Doty, create the atmosphere of gathering around a campfire or perhaps in a dusty old attic to share those ghost stories. super fun. I'll be linking to both Off the Beaten Podcast and Homespun Haints in the show notes so you can check them out, because you love finding new podcasts to listen to as much as I do, right? Okay, back to the tarot card podcast reading. One of my favorite childhood Halloween costumes was that of fortune teller. Decked out in frocks from the thrift store, big jewelry, and sparkly makeup, I've always been fascinated by the possibility of one being able to see the future, or at least be able to see things that most people cannot. Of course, tarot cards may not actually be about telling the future, at least I don't think they are, but I do like to use the cards as a tool for contemplation to help me see what I otherwise might not have about a certain situation. So at some point, I had the idea to do this in relation to my podcast because sometimes, and if you've been doing this podcasting thing a while, I think you might agree, podcasting can get lonely. You ask for feedback from your audience and get oh so little. You keep producing content that you think your listeners will enjoy, but it's really a guessing game. You keep checking your numbers, stats, reviews, email, social media, and it feels oh so slow growing. So how do you find the fortitude to keep going? And when you come to a fork in the road, how do you know which path to take? A tarot card spread may be just the thing to help guide you. And I did just that for this show, Podcast Envy, this week. Here's what I pulled. Card number 1, Justice. Card number 2, 3 of Swords. Card number 3, the Hermit. You may not have any idea what the heck I'm talking about, what any of those cards mean, what they look like, or you may be jumping to all kinds of conclusions if you have some familiarity with the tarot. Hang on a sec. I will definitely tell you what this all means and what it has to do with you. Yes, you. But first, today's podcast angel is my Podcast Envy Craft and Culture community on patreon.com. Patreon is a platform that gives us a space to connect. Yes, us. Connecting, to learn and to play, and to help me both afford to and feel supported in continuing to create more and deeper content to help you on your podcasting journey. At this moment, you can go to thecreativeimposter.com/craft and culture and join for $5 a month to get the Craft and Culture behind the scenes podcast. Exclusively for Patreon members, you can submit your most specific questions and I will answer them on that private feed. At the $29 per month VIP level, you'll also get an invitation to a monthly group video chat with me where we can talk about your show. Remember how I just said podcasting can get super lonely? Yeah. This is a way to have a conversation around your show, to celebrate your wins, to share ideas, to gather wisdom, and encourage each other to take risks, to grow, and to make a show that really matters. Right now, through October 31st, 2019 only, that's only a few more days, when you join at either the $5 or the $29 level, you'll get a complimentary tarot card podcast reading from me, custom for your show. You don't need to know anything about tarot or even believe anything about it for this to be useful to you. Whether you're an aspiring, new, or seasoned podcaster, this is a super fun way to shift your perspective and put some fresh energy into your show. You can join the fun over on Patreon at thecreativeimposter.com/craft and culture, linked, of course, in the show notes for this episode. Okay, enough about your podcast tarot reading. Here's what my spread means and how to do a reading yourself. Quick side note, when you check out the Craft and Culture page on Patreon, you'll see an article with the instructions for how to do this yourself, along with an example featuring Podcast Envy with different cards than the ones that I just told you. That's because that article was written about a year ago and I did a different poll. So that is from an old reading. What I'm about to tell you is the most current, because yes, the purpose and path of your show will and should wind and weave in different directions over time. So that reflects then, this reflects now. Just to review, card number 1, Justice, card number 2, 3 of Swords, and card number 3, the Hermit. So here's what I've come up with. Card number 1 represents you, the podcaster. So In this case, card number 1, justice, represents me. Card number 2 represents your listeners. So in this case, you. That's the 3 of swords. Card number 3 represents the relationship between us, or another way of looking at it is how we can create value together. And this is really the secret to how you leverage the reading to make your content plan going forward. Also, it's important to know that there are so many ways to interpret these cards. I have learned, mostly from Charlotte, that it's more important to trust your intuitive feelings around the card that you pull than to get caught up in the guidebook or traditional interpretations. So if you're very well versed in tarot and you're listening to these interpretations and you're like, where is she getting this? Just know that's how I work. Card number 1, that's me, is Justice. The deck that I'm using for this reading is The Wild Unknown by Kim Kranz, and Justice traditionally is often depicted with scales, like the sign of Libra in astrology, and it is often interpreted as a fork in the road, a divergence, a choice to be made, either this or that, or a weighing of options, a weighing of value, striving for some kind of balance or fairness. In this deck, however, justice is very different. Kim Kranz draws it in black and white, showing 2 cats, one white, one black, with a downward pointing sword between them, focusing the tip at a diamond. The cats' heads are turned to face toward me. Their tails are intertwined. What I see immediately in this card is yin and yang, the concept of dualism from Chinese philosophy that describes how seemingly opposite or even conflicting forces may actually be complementary, interconnected, and interdependent to create a whole, and how they might even give rise to each other. So 2 conflicting things coexisting and even co-creating each other. One cannot exist without the other. Also, of course, I immediately noticed cats, quite possibly my favorite of creatures, who in their own dualistic way are both seemingly aloof and yet the most compassionate, soothing presence when you really need them. Card number 2. This represents you listening to this right now, the 3 of Swords. Oh, this card. There's a lot to take in. So in this deck, there are 3 swords bundled together by a long, tangled red ribbon. The tips of the swords are dripping with blood, and there is darkness behind them. Are you feeling spooked out or worried yet? Don't be. Swords cards have a tendency to represent some kind of challenge, some kind of, dare I say, growing edge, which to me also means an opportunity for something. Often when this card comes up, it's like being stabbed in the heart 3 times. It can represent betrayal or heartbreak or turmoil. When I look at this particular card, I see all this tangled red ribbon around these swords, like something is bundled up and bottled up inside. It's almost like something terrible happened, and then somebody tried to clean it up really quickly and wrap it up and contain it. And the opportunity that I see for that, for you, as both the listener to Podcast Envy and the podcaster or soon-to-be podcaster, is that if you are podcasting, if you want to be podcasting, whether it's for personal reasons or for professional reasons, or both, there's something that you have to say. There is something that came before this moment that you have got to express. There's some heart, there's some passion, right? The word passion, we usually use the word passion colloquially to mean like something that you love, 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 love. But the true root of passion actually means suffering. So if you have a deep-rooted passion for something, that is what people will relate to. That is what people want to hear. That is what people connect with. It's the story of suffering being transformed into not suffering, into something new. And so though this card may feel really dark and heavy and bloody and gory and whatever, it doesn't have to be that heavy and dark. It just simply represents an opportunity for you to share that transformation. In fact, it represents an opportunity for the transformation itself. So maybe you're not even on the other side of it. Maybe you're working through something. Maybe the suffering is around your show. Maybe the suffering is around, here I am creating this show, and I don't even know if it matters. I don't even know if I want to keep doing it. I feel like I'm up against a wall. I feel like nobody's listening. I feel like nobody cares. I feel like I put all this work in, and then I put it out there and nothing happens. And it's like a knife in the heart that I put all my heart and soul into this, and I'm just not getting out of it what I want back. Maybe that's the betrayal. Where is the opportunity to unwind, unwrap, disentangle all of that into some fresh productivity, some forward motion, that growing edge? You are in the place of the growing edge. And now card number 3. Card number 3 represents our relationship, how we provide value by being together, by connecting in this space. What happens when we come together? And I drew the hermit. The hermit, usually in our culture, when we think of a hermit, we think of like some grouchy, old, weird person that hides in the shadows and never leaves their house. They're probably a hoarder. I don't know. That's what we typically think of when we think of a hermit. However, this card is depicted by a turtle, a grand turtle with an elaborate shell who's tucked inside that shell. And at the very top of the shell is an oil lamp with a single orange flame illuminating the darkness around the turtle. It's actually quite a lovely card that I haven't spent as much time with in this deck. I hardly ever pull this card. What I immediately think of when I see this card, and depending on how old you are, this might make you laugh, but remember that movie from the 80s, The Never-Ending Story? There's a character in The Never-Ending Story, which is Morla. Morla is this enormous tortoise that is like all wise, that the hero Atreyu sets out to figure out how he can battle and overcome this immense darkness that is descending upon them, which is called the Nothing. So he goes to seek out Morla to get this wisdom, and it is just giant tortoise that's been asleep for like ever and is really irritated to get woken up, right? So anyways, that's what I think of when I see this card. Perhaps it's time for me to go back and rewatch The Never-Ending Story. It has been a number of years. Also, it got a fresh new pop culture reference in the most recent season of Stranger Things. So if you're into that, even if you never saw The Never-Ending Story, you probably kind of know what I'm talking about. Okay, so what on earth does this giant tortoise with an oil lamp on its back have to do with our relationship as podcasters? I'm telling you, man, this tarot stuff is deep. It obviously means wisdom. It obviously means going inward, not reaching out in all these crazy directions and like moving fast to find answers and do all the things. It means pulling back, pulling in, seeking the truth, the answers, the wisdom from within. Also, the number associated with this card is the number 9. And in the tarot, number 9 is normally associated with completion. So what I take this reading to mean, here's how this goes. Justice, the yin and the yang. My role as a mentor and a guide for you is to be someone who sees the complete picture, who sees how these conflicts, questions, sticky points, challenges, these conflicting ideas even relate to each other, and to hold the duality of all of the possible things in one whole, to have the capacity to consider things from all angles, weigh the possibilities, and then see how everything is interconnected. The 3 of Swords, which represents you, the Podcast Envy listener and community member, is about whatever is tangling you up, whatever is binding you, whatever is preventing that swift, clear communication. There's something that's stuck, and together we are going to look internally. Internally, we are going to pause to take a moment of self-reflection, to gather that internal wisdom, to create the light that then illuminates the way free from whatever is bound up, whatever is entangled, whatever is not clear, to come back to that complete circle that contains all the possibilities and ultimately gives rise to the meaning, the message, the purpose, the passion behind what it is we're creating. I came up with that interpretation just now on the spot as I was recording this. I didn't even write it out ahead of time. I'm so proud of myself. It means that my tarot skills are growing. But that's how a reading works. We're taking the images, the words, the meaning, the symbolism behind the cards. We're checking in with our own intuition, what we feel arising, what comes to mind, and then we're creating a story. And that story is what gives us meaning, that gives us a message for how we move forward. So I don't know if that interpretation resonates with you. I don't know if that entanglement of the Three of Swords resonates with you. I don't know if it makes you feel inspired, excited, if it makes you feel heavy. I'm really curious, actually, what you think about that reading. It feels a little vulnerable to be sharing this kind of stuff on Podcast Envy. But anyways, if you want to do a reading for yourself, here's how it works. You can use any tarot or oracle card deck that you may happen to have. Don't have a deck? No worries. You can just download a free app called the Golden Thread Tarot. If you're using a deck, shuffle them up, cut, and choose 3 cards. 1, 2, 3. If you're using the app, choose Get a Reading and choose one of the 3 card spreads. The one that I used as a test is called Situation, Action, Outcome. It's important that while you're shuffling, cutting and selecting, or while you're clicking on the app, that you have the name of your show in mind. Maybe you even say it out loud. Once you've selected your cards, number 1 represents you, number 2 represents your listeners, number 3 represents your relationship, or possibly how you can provide value for your listeners. Then look at the cards. See how the images make you feel. Jot down on paper what you notice, any words or phrases or ideas or feelings that come to mind. Be careful not to jump straight to the text description in the guidebook. On the app, it's a little bit hard because the text is right there. And I know for me, my eye immediately wants to read that rather than creating my own conclusions. The text that you're given from the app or from the guidebook is only one way to interpret the card, and it may not be exactly right for you. So resist. Once you've jotted down a few ideas, words, phrases, feelings, you might want to take the time to journal about how the 3 cards might relate and see if you can craft a short story about you and your listeners with the cards. Last step, reflect on any actions that you might take or choices that you might make about the content of your show, or possibly even about the marketing plan for your show as a result of your reading. If you're like, whoa, this is way over my head, it's way too complex, but I find it super fascinating, and you want to get a reading from me, I can either pull the cards for you, or you can send me the cards that you pulled for yourself, and we can talk about it once you become a member of the Podcast Envy Craft and Culture community over at thecreativeimposter.com/craft and culture on Patreon. Again, you can join at the $5 a month level or the $29 a month level, and I will reach out to you to schedule your complimentary reading as my gift for helping get this community started. I really want to do this, so you have until Halloween, October 31st, 2019, to get this free bonus. And if you get in before November 1st, you're going to get another free bonus in November that I will tell you about on the next episode of Podcast Envy. Podcast Envy is produced by your podcast boss, Andrea Klunder. That's me. The Podcast Envy theme music is by Valentin Sosnitsky, courtesy of the Free Sound Project at freesound.org, and our podcast Angel music is by Benjamin Mastropolito, also on freesound.org as Lemon Cream. All music is licensed under the Creative Commons. Our episodes are mixed by Edwin Ruiz, and hey, if you want your show to sound as good as ours, hire us. Put the magic audio mojo of the Creative Imposter Studios to work for you. Thanks so much for listening, and here's to making your podcast the envy of everyone else.